In the fall of 2011, the Korean game developer Neowiz Games announced their first MMORPG venture with the seemingly revolutionary and graphically pleasing Blast Online, drawing a lot of attention from the MMORPG community both domestically and internationally. Nearly 4 years later, in the summer of 2015, the initial South Korean open beta was launched with a lot of hype around it. Much to the testers' surprise, Blast Online's open beta had been one of the biggest disappointments for the genre in 2015, with many of its players quitting very early on due to the extremely unoptimized and nearly unplayable state of the game. On top of this, Black Desert Online had just been released 2 months before, and so much of the public eye was still drawn to that already polished, beautiful game. A terrible first experience due to the ungodly lag and having to compete for players with not only Black Desert, but also with at the time still popular Arcade had left Blast Online at the bottom of the totem pole. And so the first wide-scale opening of the game to Korea was unfortunately overshadowed, and little attention ever really came to it in the months after that. A year later, in December of 2016, the first localization of the game began with the launch of the Russian version, bringing back a bit of hype to the title once more, with Western players finally able to register for the game without the need for special identification. Unfortunately for, well, everyone, Neowiz hadn't learned their lesson and allowed the publishing of a client with the same unplayable optimization that essentially killed their Korean version. Millions of dollars on voice actors and translators down the drain, with the Russian version shutting down only 5 months after it launched. By this time, many had deemed Blast to be a failure, even more so when the planned publisher for the English version, Aeria Games, announced that they were dropping the title too. Now going into 2018, 7 years after its announcement, Neowiz has pulled up its sleeves and have rebuilt many core concepts of the game, giving one final hope for the title to Western players: Blast Online's rebuilt global version. I'll start with what the majority of comments I get seem to be about, and that is the game's combat. What we can expect to see in global is at the least what was already done with the rebuild. Every class in the game has been changed dramatically to be more fast-paced, with many of them getting lower cooldowns, new skills, revamped skills, and updated skill progression. Many skills that worked against mobility for certain classes were either removed or replaced. For example, the majority of old traps from the Ranger skill tree have been thrown away, as they took a lot of time to set and from my experience had very little use in both PvE and PvP. They added new traps to even early on in the leveling phase that can be casted from afar and while moving. There is no full list of these changes right now in English, and of course they may be improved further in the global version, but I believe that all of the classes we will have in global will have their revamped skill trees. This is the old skill progression system, in which players had to buy skills as they leveled up, and while there was a wide variety of skills to choose from to create builds, aside from choosing, not much else was ever really done to them. This is the new skill progression. As you can see right away, it is much more complicated with skills to be upgraded, on top of choosing what goes in our limited skill bar. All that being said, the basic concept of locking onto a target to attack it still remains. So those of you wondering if they've made its combat a true action combat, no they haven't, and no they will not do that for the global version. Personally, I don't have an issue with Blast Online's combat. I do find it enjoyable and rewarding enough, but there is no doubt that even with all of the skill changes, its combat is nowhere near as fluid and satisfying as its predecessors, Guild Wars 2, Arcade, and Black Desert. Thankfully though, there are other game features, and for me, not everything is about combat. One major content related thing that I believe is going to be a deciding factor for Blast Online's global release is how far into the rebuild updates there will be initially. Previous releases in Russia and Japan have all began by lacking at the minimum 2 classes, always missing the Mystic in the beginning. If the game launches again in the same way without Mystic and Ranger initially, to me that will be a huge red flag. Content in Blast does not vary tremendously in the early levels. Trust me, it's all essentially the same route for everyone, even if you're camping elite monsters for EXP or only doing questing 24/7. Having only 4 or 5 classes instead of 7, forcing all of the healers to be paladin and all the ranged DPS to be mage will not give a good first impression, especially because Mystic and Ranger are arguably the most popular and looked forward to. I'm hoping they'll be smart and give as much class variety as possible right away, considering that at the minimum, Ranger is already rebuilt and good to go. Neowiz also has only given up to level 45 content for every initial localization so far, and I'm inclined to believe that we will get the same for global. Preferably, I would like to see up to level 50 content released at launch, as Blast's endgame at 45 is very lacking when it comes to party content, but I feel that it will be a long shot. However, if we do get 45 initially, Neowiz will surely need to add as many group content as they can as soon as possible, to have enough content to keep people entertained and busy while waiting for the level 50 content. If I recall correctly, there's only one, maybe 2 dungeons at 45 endgame that are interesting, and a handful of dungeons from the prior levels are not all that impressive or challenging. A few of them are typically done soloed or with a small group. I expect that initially we will not get the 10-man raid content like Tomb of the Warrior King and Data Fortress, which is completely fine because hardly anyone will get to that point at the beginning anyway. But hopefully those group content are patched in within only a few months of the release. A lot of it's really gonna come down to how much content we can play within the first 4 weeks, because if it's not enough, the game will surely look very shallow. While Steam will certainly provide a good initial burst of players, the nature of Steam reviews could also backfire against it and just as easily bury the title if its content is not impressive. So far, every Blast version has been voice acted with the language for their region, in Korean, Russian, and Japanese, and I think it's safe to predict that the global version, their biggest audience yet, will be voice acted too. Now, while Neowiz had posted that global will be localized in English, German, and Russian, I believe that the voice acting will likely only be in English, and that an option for language preference for UI and text translations will be offered when starting the game. That's just what makes the most sense to me, as surely they don't intend to fully voice act the game in German too. Speaking of UI, there's been a big UI update as well, replacing the old cluttered menu with a clean system menu at the bottom, very much like Black Desert. Although it's still not resizable, a feature that the community's been asking for with no return since 2015, so I wouldn't expect to see that changed in global. Before I move forward, I just want to answer a question I get very often, and for sure I'll get in this video, and that is, when do I think the global version will launch? I think the release date will be somewhere around Q2 of 2018 with an early access sometime around March. Anyways, when it comes to the cash shop, I have mostly positive things to say about what Neowiz has been doing so far with it, and with what I predict we will get in global. From the beginning, Blast Online's cash shop has always had little to no pay-to-win elements, only cosmetics and convenience items. For the rebuild project, they've added mounts and pet skins in the shop, which personally in design choice I feel are completely immersion breaking, but I can tolerate considering that they are a way for Neowiz to monetize the game without going into a pay-to-win direction. They've done a pretty good job with that in the old versions of the game, Korea and Russia, and I hope they will continue to do so in the global version. There is one thing, however, that raises a bit of concern for global, which is that currently in the Japanese open beta, items to make upgrading pets and mounts easier, and items to get the skills you want from pets can be bought from the cash shop. Pets in this game have very good benefits now after the rebuild, from huge experience buffs to ones that can give a lot of physical defense, higher backward movement speed, so on and so forth. They increase significantly when they get to higher tiers, so upgrading them is very beneficial. Considering that almost everyone will be taming and upgrading their pets to get those type of beneficial skills, it is worrisome that those who want the best of the best can swipe for more attempts for them. While it may not be directly pay to win, it is for sure pay to get ahead and pay to get to higher level resources more quickly. Hopefully we don't get that in our global version. I've been making consistent content for Blast Online for quite some time, so I feel I have a fair grasp of how popular it is at the moment. I feel that for Blast to really be successful, it's going to need massive ad campaigns like Kakao Games does with Black Desert, both to start and keep a good player population. Hopefully, instead of relying heavily on players sharing and creating content, like Neowiz did with Black Squad, they'll invest a lot into getting people to try the game. Black Squad, by the way, is Neowiz's free-to-play FPS also on Steam, that while is highly rated with mostly positive reviews, is not nearly as heard of or talked about as other FPS in the market, presumably due to low advertisement. Neowiz will really need to step it up with highlighting the game's good features, cause the hype meter is not all that high even after they announce global. I will stand with Blast and say that I think it's a game with a lot of potential. By that I mean both the potential to be one of the main contenders in the MMORPG genre for 2018, and the potential to be just another game overshadowed by Black Desert Online, Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, and Guild Wars 2. Of course, I'm rooting for the former. If you're interested in learning more about Blast Online, do check out my playlist of nearly 40 videos on the game, from the very basics to top 10s, tips and reviews of multiple versions of the game. Anyways, what are your thoughts on the upcoming global version of Blast? Are you looking forward to it? Do you think it will be successful? Let me know in the comments below. do subscribe if you haven't yet, and if you would like to further support my channel and help me make more videos on MMORPGs, consider pledging to me as a patron through patreon.com/Nocht. Thank you so much for watching this far. Till next time, have a good day and happy holidays.